Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Houston Open. Gonna break down what to expect from this course, which will look a little bit different here in the spring as opposed to November. And of course, afterwards, some of the key stats and comps that I'm looking at to try and identify my top plays. And then we'll go through some of my top plays both for fantasy and for outright bets to give you an idea of some of the exposure that I'm getting to this week. It's a strange field with Scotty as the clear favorite out there. We'll talk about how I'm handling him out there for my exposure and for potentially some top 10, top 20 bets that I think you can look at towards the middle to top end of the board. So a lot to talk about here, a lot to go through. Let's start off with a look at the golf course and some of my modeling out there for Memorial Park. Like I alluded to off the bat, because this is being played in March as opposed to November, we've got different agronomy this time, rough that's only about half the length of what we typically see at this golf course, and also what I think is going to be an easier track with more receptive greens and fairways. So a lot to talk about. Of course, I have a whole video dedicated towards that over there with my course preview. But in terms of how it affects the golf course, I think it puts more emphasis on the distance, as you're not going to get nearly the same kind of rollout as what we're used to at a Texas golf course. And it also probably adds even more emphasis to the irons. The one main change there from last year to what we're going to get this time is the lack of rough, and really what I think is going to be a lack of penalty off the tee, on top of just having no real resistance when it comes to, a typical like 3-4 inch rough. It's only going to be 1.25 inches this week. So when you're missing in that rough, it's going to have little to no effect. And on top of that, there's no water because it's a Texas style golf course. There are 2 holes where you have water in play off the tee, and the other 2 holes that have water on it are par 3s where it's not nearly that same sort of effect. So what I'm expecting to see is a little bit of a bomber's paradise, players with that distance to take on a longer course because of that lack of rollout, and because everyone off the tee is kind of going to have a wide open course to work with. You still have 30 to 40 yard wide fairways anyways, so it's not like driving accuracy was real difficult here to begin with. I think you're going to see the guys with the longer play, the higher club head speed, really separate themselves out there. So in terms of how it plays differently, I think that's the main change that we're going to get. And on top of that, anytime you have a course where you're not really penalized off the tee, if you don't have that driving distance, the other way to separate yourself is with the iron play. And because the rough is a little bit, more tame this year, also you're going to have more receptive greens likely. The players that can throw darts, that especially from like 175 to 200 and 200 to 225 yards are some of your best players in the field. That's another way you could go out there and separate yourself. So for my top end plays, I'm looking for guys that are both long and good approach players. And outside of that, I'm looking at some green regulation stuff. Something to not discount would be the around the green shots here are real difficult. But if you're looking at around the green as one of your top stats, you're not going to get a lot of those fantasy poppers or top end performances. So it's still in the model. Same thing with putting right down here at number 4 and 5, but they are a lot less important on this sort of golf course than what you get for other ones out there in Tour. And I've seen a few naysayers on Twitter, right, saying stuff about how if you use all 4 stat categories in a model, you're just like looking at shots gained total. Those people have no idea what they're talking about. If you're handicapping a golf event and you're not including all 4 stat categories, all 4 facets of golf, I have no idea what you're doing with your analysis, right? You have to still look at them. Maybe you'll look at them a little bit less on a given week like this, but to go out here and, handicap a golf course without looking at putting or around the green at all would, in my opinion, be pretty moronic. So not going to call out any specific people there, but you know who you are if you're watching this, and I know you watch my content because of some of the comments I've seen. And yeah, they're in the model, but they're a lot less important on a week like this, is it gets to the distinction that I want to make there. Par 3 scoring, you have 5 par 3s this week, so maybe slightly more important there. And then in terms of our comp courses, I've got Vedanta Vallarta there, Mexico Open, another wide open course where it's about that distance in that iron play. Also Detroit Golf Club, same kind of thing, right? More of a distance and iron play sort of golf course. And then Augusta National, which last year was our number 1 comp course for this event, I think is a much better comp when we have it on more firm and fast conditions. In March, right, I don't think it's going to play that kind of way. But if we look at the Masters that was played in November, and there's not a lot of crossover from guys that were playing that week compared to what we have now. But I think conditions-wise, it's actually going to be kind of similar to what we had there. So of course, the November Masters was a little bit damper that year, different part of the country, right? Different climates that we're dealing with, but it played a lot softer on the greens, right? Played a lot softer on the fairways. Winning score was a lot lower than what we're used to seeing. So maybe you could look at that for a little bit of your correlation analysis. So not a strong week for the comps, especially because it's the first year that we're seeing this golf course under these kind of conditions. But the main thing I think I would focus on here is that this should be a second shot golf course, right? Without the lack of rough out there. And then from the off the tee perspective, I can't see how driving accuracy would be all that important. So, just like putting around the green, I'm not completely avoiding driving accuracy because, the guys that are super accurate, it'll give them a little bit of a boost this week. Just like being a really good putter, really good around the green player gives you a little bit of a boost, right, out there for a week like this, but not a very large boost, right? Not like being an elite tier driver would out there in my analysis. So that's what I'll say from the custom model perspective, and you're going to see a lot of that reflected with the different fantasy and outright players that we're taking. So let's hop over here to DraftKings, talk through some of our strategy, both when it comes to putting together some of those GPP lineups and, of course, going out there and taking outrights. And this week, I've got to say, Scotty Sheffer will be a core play. We're going to talk about how I'm deploying him out there for a week like this, but he scares the ever-living hell out of me. He's definitely got about 30% win equity this week, but the plus 275 number that you can take on, for outrights on some of the books out there, it's just my opinion, it's screwed up value. It's nowhere near the number that you should be getting. And while I do think he's a good chance he ends up taking home that trophy, there's no chance I'd bet him there at plus 275. So I don't have any outright exposure. I think the only way I would get there is if I took him for a wire-to-wire winner, and then the odds would have to reflect, the low chance of that even happening to begin with. So that's probably not going to happen. I don't imagine a sports book is going to give us a number that would be attractive enough there. So now just taking him in fantasy, and he's not going to be a lock for me by any means. I'm expecting him to be like 30 to 40% owned. There's a good chance I match the field, right? Take him at like 40, maybe 50% of my lineups. But either way, I don't think that he's somebody that you could consider fading here. Few reasons for it. So, modeling wise, right, if we're looking for guys with approach, play, and distance, he's going to check those boxes quite a bit. But the main thing for Scotty is that you got to take him at courses where he has either historically putted well or putts well on that surface. And he's done both, right? He's been pretty decent putting here. He hasn't been great, right? He's been a slight loser in most years putting here. But compared to other tracks on tour, right, that's far from some of the worst. And if you take a look at his numbers on this POA overseed in general, again, right, the agronomy has changed, right? They used to just be pure Bermuda grass here. Bermuda's like an okay surface for Scotty. He's usually right around a neutral player, which is kind of in line, right, with what we've seen for him at this golf course. Well, the two events that he's won in a row have been on this POA overseed. In fact, if you take a look at a lot of his wins on tour, in fact, I think it's like 60% of his tour wins, or even more than that, have all been on this POA overseed surface. So you'll see that he's a gainer on it, right? He's about 0.3 strokes per round into the positive on POA overseed, and compared to his baseline, that's about a half a stroke better. So you're talking about a guy who already fit this course, right? He doesn't have a win here, but did go out there and have the second place 2 years ago, ninth last year without his best stuff. Made the cut his first two starts when he was still getting his footing on tour out here, and that was without the advantageous putting conditions. So, it could go sideways for him in a hurry, right? That's why I'm not betting him at something like plus 275. But in DFS, right, he's going to be like half my lineups, right? He's probably going to be like 40, 50% owned for me, which might be matching the field, might be slightly over the field when it comes to the exposure. But either way, he is a player, even at 13 grand, even at that kind of ownership, that I think you might actually still get some value in, which is crazy. I know, right? If I think he has like a 30% win equity, I mean, he's got well over a 50% chance of finishing top 5, right? If I'm looking at that kind of projection. So it's a kind of uncharted territory right out here with Scotty Sheffer. Our New Year's resolution to play more Scotty has certainly worked out here to start this calendar year. So I'm riding with that. I know the price tag's crazy. I know the ownership will probably be outrageous out here on Scotty, but I think the putting numbers were really what drove it home. And of course, he's number one in every sort of model that you could possibly look at. So whether it's course history, whether it's recent form, total model ranking, you name it, he's going to be number one pretty much with everything. And there's not anything you can really say that's bad here, right? I mean, all the tee to green categories are over 3/4 of a stroke per round. The putter has been a slight positive. I'd say on this surface, right, would be due for a little bit of regression. And even if we zoom out a little bit, right, you start to see some of the negative putting numbers, but still outrageously good when it comes to his shots gained tee to green. And we're getting them on that surface where he has all those spike performances. So don't think I needed, or you needed to be sold on somebody like a Scotty Sheffer this week, but I guess just trying to get it on record here, as I still think he's a good play at that crazy ownership and crazy price tag. Next up, a guy that I did take outright. In fact, he's the only outright bet that I've taken this week. It might only be the only outright bet that I'm taking because I'm so scared of Scotty Sheffer winning this event. It's the guy he's finished runner-up to in both of the recent events, and honestly, I think a better course fit than Scotty Sheffer. And, Scotty's by far the best player. He's by far the best play on this slate. So just because I think Clark's a better course fit does not mean I think he's a better play. But in terms of just like setting up a golf course that sets up for somebody, the way that they have this Houston Open setup is perfect for Wyndham, right? You want to take him at courses where you can miss off the earth, right? Obviously, the US Open he won over there in LA, LA Country Club was set up exactly for that. And with 1.25 inch rough, I mean, literally no rough out there, the only trouble Clark's going to get into is it's 2 tee shots on the back 9. I think it's like 15, 16, or it's 16, 17, something like that, where you have water down the right. He does have a left to right ball flight, so that, could be a sore spot for him, but that's 2 of the 13 tee shots, right? There are 5 par 3s, so there's only 13 tee shots around this property. I think that helps him. I think his par 3 scoring has been kind of average to start this year, but in general, right, I trust him with the irons and the putter. And you're talking about a guy who has the best form humanly imaginable, right? I mean, if we take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, his iron play is up there with a Scotty, right? And the key X factor here, and why I actually think he's a better course fit. I mean, first off, the driving accuracy thing is huge for Wyndham Clark, right? He can just spray it out there, and he's going to have a pretty damn good week, right? Hitting out of that non-existent rough. Is he's a consistent gainer with the putter. And if you take a look at the numbers on Poa Overseed, they're actually not that much better than what we have for Scotty Sheffer. But if you're, asking me to take a guy to go out there and gain like 7 strokes putting, you can't tell me with a straight face that you'd rather have Scotty Sheffer than Wyndham Clark. So while Scotty has edged him the last few weeks, I think the outright value is undoubtedly on somebody like Wyndham Clark, who I've got there at 13-1, which I know he's 12-1 on a lot of other books, so you might not be able to get that 13 number, but even at 12-1, I think still has some value out there, and is somebody that I think the win is coming for. I mean, you saw him last year get on that heater, right? Win Wells Fargo, have a few good starts, and go out there and win the US Open. He's gone second. He's only 2 weeks removed, right, from the Players, right? Valspar Championship he took off. He's the kind of guy that I want to ride when he's hot. And I think 13-1 isn't the greatest number. I mean, to think, even a month, maybe a month and a half ago that we'd have to bet him at 13-1 would be ludicrous, right? If you went back there and told yourself that. But with the form, the course fit that I see here, as odd as it is, I think it's another spot that you can get some value on. So I went out there, took Windy C in a few lineups, taking the shot at him going out there and trying to beat Scotty Sheffer. And he's going to be damn motivated to do so, right? As I had to field a ton of questions about, finishing runner-up to him in back-to-back weeks. And he's the type of fiery competitor that I think could go out there and get himself into contention once again. So we'll have to see. I think at DFS, he will be popular as well. I mean, you go back-to-back runner-ups, a lot of people are going to want to play Wyndham Clark. But hopefully enough still want to play Theegala, Zalatoris. I think a ton of people are going to play Scotty to where Clark's probably going to be sub 30%. And I think anything between like 20, maybe 25% ownership would still be a number that I'm going to try and get some leverage to. So if I'm going to take Scotty in half my lineups, Windy in like maybe 40, 45%, there's not going to be a lot left to work with, right? So, I might have one other guy here out of maybe a Theegala, Zalatoris, or Finau, but it might just be these top 2 guys that I'm taking in my player pool. So a lot of that is going to depend on the ownership up here, right? How I can go out there and distribute my shares. But as of right now, my top 2 priorities, right, are those top 2 players, right? Guys that have gone first, second, the last 2 tournaments they've played, and in my opinion, are really good course fits as well. And we'll take a look at the event history, right? Obviously, Scotty we went through with the 2 top 10s. Wyndham finished in 16th last year, but was in the top 5 for a lot of Sunday. So a little late collapse for Wyndham, right? Took him down there to just a top 20 finish. but, had that run last year before he went out there and really got that form towards the middle to the end of last season. And I think this sets up just perfectly for him right out there with the reduced rough. Next up, we're going out of the outright, so no more outrights out here for this week. It's going to be a top 10 on Tom Hoge, who I also think is going to be chalky this week. Anytime you're a player that's gaining 1.55 shots on approach per round, people are going to play you, right? And those are the exact numbers that he's putting up over the last 12 measured rounds. And if I think this is a second shot golf course, right, sure, it'd be nice to have the off the tee play of a Wyndham Clark, right? All that driving distance that I'm looking for out there. Hoge is like an average distance guy. He's definitely not a short player by any means. I think a lot of people kind of misrepresent him as that. He is extremely inaccurate though, and at a golf course where you can kind of just spray it off the tee, well, that kind of plays directly into what we're looking for. So he's got that approach play we're hoping for. The putter can definitely be a little bit hot and cold, right? He's streaky when it comes out there to making putts. But when we're looking for a top 10 or, of course, to go out there and be optimal for DFS, we're hoping that we can get that spike week with the putter. So if we take a look at the long-term form, he is number 2 in terms of my course fit, which just tells you that it's not just the last 12 rounds, right? You take a look at the last 24 rounds, last 50 rounds, which I use for a lot of this, he's still gaining 1.54 shots gained approach per round. I mean, literally next level stuff. And the off the tee play is not great, but this is a golf course where I think it's much more about the second shot than it is about the first shot. And long term, he still gains with the flat stick, right? He's gaining 0.27 shots per round. So he has more spike weeks than he has down weeks. Just gotta hope that we time it up there right at $9,000. So he's a high upside spike kind of player that I love taking for fantasy formats. And honestly, right, I don't want to bet a lot of outrights because of Scotty, right, because I'm taking a Clark there at 13-1. So I thought the 10-1 number at plus 425 was a good way to get that exposure. Before we hop into our last few plays, just reminded you, for access to everything you see on these spreadsheets, my exposure, my projected ownership, player poll for GPPs and all of that, make sure to check out the Patreon page. There's a link down below to that. On there, you can sign up for any given tier, whether you're somebody that's just playing fantasy, there's a tier for you there. Whether you're somebody that's just doing props, so maybe it's underdog fantasy, prize picks that you're going out there and playing, I have a whole tier for that. Or of course, a combined golf tier if you're going out there and playing all those different sort of exposure. So there's something on there for everybody. I've got my outright betting stuff on there as well, my betting card for any given week, and you get access to my Discord server. You can go out there and ask me any specific questions, run ideas off the rest of the community, all of that under there on the Patreon page. So check it out. That's where you can get these spreadsheets for yourself, right? Download them, use them for your own analysis, to go out there, do research. Again, we have all those projections on there I mentioned, made cut rate, all the different sorts of modeling that I'm using, form, event history, shots gained metrics, you name it, right? All of that to make your life a little bit easier and save you some time when you're going out there and doing your research. But enough with the plug. Let's move on to our value plays, where we're not taking any more outrights, but we're looking for bombers, right? Guys that can bang it out there, guys that are, solid approach players. And Jake Knap is exactly that, right? He's $8,000 for DFS. I think that's a fair price tag. But with the top 10 at plus 450 is another player that I think you can get some value on here. So if we circle back to our key stats, we go down here to the comp courses, right? Number 1 comp course was the Mexico Open, where, right, for Jake Knap went out there and got his first tour win. So that's pretty sweet to see. Next up, he gains 0.64 shots per round when it comes to his putting on the surface. So API didn't have the best week, right? Had that ejection on, hole number 5 or 6, that long par 5. Still putted well there, right? Putted well, the players putted well last week, right? I believe he played Valspar. If not, I take that back. Let me double check on good old Knap. So yeah, did not play Valspar. Take that back. But the 2 weeks before that, putted pretty well, as you can see with the 0.64 shots gained per round. And when you take a look at the shots gained metrics, they don't wow you, right? He's actually losing off the tee because of that ejection at the API, but solid approach player, solid putter, good enough around the green, and we've seen him do it at this kind of golf course before. So I think the ownership, it'll be a little bit high compared to some of the other guys around him, but I think it's warranted given the kind of skill set that he has. He can struggle with that accuracy. You saw that at API. You've seen that with a few of the ejections that you've had with Jake Knap, but not a ton of water, right, to get into this week. You have some trees out there around this golf course, but they're far enough away from the fairways where you're really going to have to miss to get into that trouble. And the beauty of the Mexico Open is that it had some of the widest fairways on tour, right? There wasn't really any sort of penalty off the tee except for like 1-2 holes where you had that water that you could hit it into. Jake Knap loves that kind of golf course. Right? I went out there, won on it on the PGA Tour. this feels like a perfect course fit for him. So the courses where Wyndham Clark is going to excel, I think that's where you're going to see Jake Knapp have that same kind of success. And they're not on the same level anymore, right? Clark has ascended, right, to one of those top 5, maybe top 10 players in the world. Jake Knapp will get there someday, right? It might take him a year or two. He's going to grow into that. I think he has that sort of potential, and this is a player that I'm looking at for a top 10 here. Next up, you've got Ryan Fox, who is the same sort of player, right? And if you saw my course breakdown, you probably knew the Ryan Fox play was coming, but at plus 750 for a top 10, that's borderline disrespectful on my boy. He's an extremely long player off the tee. He's been good on approach, good with the putter over his PGA Tour career here, but why he's had some inconsistency with making cuts has been all about the driving accuracy. He hits the ball a country mile. He's one of the thickest, strongest guys that you're going to see on any golf tour, let alone what we have here on the PGA Tour. And driving distance is not an issue, right? The issue is just keeping the ball in play. And when we had him in these Florida golf courses, right, the reason why I was advocating for him so much during the course preview is that even on the DP World Tour, on courses where you had a bunch of water, he'd eject, he'd miss cuts. You'd see that all the time. But over there in Europe, it's not as a prominent feature on golf courses. Water, especially on the European-style courses, like link-style golf courses, you just don't see it very often, right? When you miss offline there, you're in the rough. And the thing that Ryan Fox is really good at, right, is extracting himself from trouble. But you can't do that when you're taking penalty drops and, hitting your third, fourth shot into greens. So Ryan Fox at $7,200, this is the sort of off the tee test that directly plays into his game. And if we were to just remove off the tee play from him, from over the last 5-6 events, around the green has been kind of okay for him too. So I would say that that's like a neutral for him. But if you just removed the off the tee, he would be making cuts. He'd be top 20ing pretty much every single week. So now that we get him on a golf course where I think we could almost do that, you got to like him at that kind of price tag. And because of the form, he's not going to be popular, right? It's why we're getting a plus 750 tag on him at this point. Because if you're box score watching, you probably don't think he's playing well. But when you look at the last 12 measured rounds, you'll see why I think there's some hope here, right? He's gaining with the approach play. He's gaining with the putter. You zoom out, right? You give him a little bit more of a sample size. You'll see that a lot of those trends just hold up, right? 0.4 shots with the approach play, maybe slightly more inconsistent with the putter. A lot of people will probably look at his off the tee and think that he lacks distance or something, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So good old Ryan Fox is somebody I'm looking for a bounce back candidate. And honestly, at the plus 750 mark for a top 10, I think he's at worst like a plus 500 kind of player. So I think there's a lot of inherent value there. He's the kind of guy that can go out there, win on the PGA Tour someday. And honestly, I wouldn't even put it past him this week. I know he's out of form. He is that sort of player, though. Long term, you're going to see Ryan Fox as a PGA Tour winner. I'm very confident saying that. Whether it's this year, next year, whatever the case is, this start for Ryan Fox is not the type of player that he is. He's a much better talent than what we've seen so far. You can say that about a lot of starts so far. There have been a few guys, especially from the DP World Tour guys. Some of the smaller names like Pavon was not a big name that was coming over. He's a solid player. He was not one of the best, 3 or 4 guys that came over, at least in my opinion. Ryan Fox is one of those guys, right? So, if Pavon's going out there and doing what he does, imagine what Ryan Fox can do if he is on that same kind of talent level. And then lastly, the last guy we're going to get to here is Cameron Champ, who honestly, after last week, I can't believe he's $6,400. I can't believe some of his top 10, top 20 numbers are as big as they are. In fact, I got a top 20 here at plus 375. I do think that he's going to get some ownership because he's just too cheap in this kind of field. But kind of like in Knapp and the other players, right? We want a Cameron Champ where he could just gain off the tee, right? He can kind of hit it all over the planet out there and get away with it. He's from Houston. He plays this golf course all the time. He has said that he has a lot of course knowledge out here at Memorial Park. He's not playing it day to day, but I think he played it towards the beginning of his professional career a little bit more. But the idea here with Cameron Champ, it's not really the familiarity that I care about. It's the course fit, right? It's the driving distance. It's that factor that we're leaning into. And then last week, can't remember the exact putting number that he put up, but he was like number 2 in the field in shots gained to putting, and I think at least if memory serves me correctly, it was like over 8 strokes that he gained on the greens. And there's one thing I know about Cameron Champ, is that he is capable of going nuclear with the putter. You saw it 2 or 3 starts ago. He gained like 5 strokes putting in his last really good performance. He's played well at Augusta National. He's one of the comps I'm looking at. I'm really looking at Vedanta. He's also played well there. And even Rocket Mortgage, he's had an okay record at some of his starts around there. He plays well at courses where you can't get in trouble off the tee. Putting kind of matters here, right? It's not the number one thing that I'm looking for. But if he continues to putt like that, that's when people jumped on him at the 3M Open, right? He won it like 200 to 1 a few years ago. He had like a really inconsistent record before that, but he had like one good start before he went out there at the 3M where he gained a bunch of strokes putting, and it was, you know, a course in 3M that favors that elite tier off the tee play. It's kind of the same thing here, right? So I haven't bet him outright. And if I'm going to take a shot on an outright this week, right, on top of Clark, it's going to be like a Fox or somebody like a Cameron Champ where like I'm truly taking a dart throw on it. So I haven't done it yet. I still have that top 20, right, that I like there at plus 375. But given the form, which isn't horrible, like he has not been playing well, right? If you take a look at this, it's not going to be very impressive. But doing his thing off the tee, the approach play and the around the green has been horrible, but he's gaining over a stroke per round with the putter, which a lot of that was because of the 8 strokes or whatever he ended up gaining over there at the Valspar. But you zoom out, right? You take a look at the last 24 rounds, right? We make it just a larger sample size we're working with. He's still gaining a bunch of the putter, still gaining a bunch off the tee. The iron play has got to come around, but you know, final round, right? Saturday, Sunday, I should say, last 2 rounds at the Valspar, he was good with the irons. He was hitting a lot of solid iron shots to like 10, 15 feet. And the key factor why he was up there in contention for a while, right, was top 5 for a lot of Sunday. I think a lot of people forget about that because of where he ended up. Well, what was it? He ended up with like 20th place or something like that. T26 even worse than that, right? Out there with his finish, he had a much better week than the stats would even indicate. So the putter's got to stay there. It could definitely go, right? But it's only 1 week later on the same type of grass. And, you know, it's a golf course where we're looking for those bombers. So why not take a chance on one of the most volatile bombers that we've got out there? And DFS definitely has that top 5, top 10 upside. Now, it's not like it's going to happen every time, but he's a flyer down here in the 6K range that you're maybe taking in 5 to 10% of your lineups at the very most, right? If you're going to get a little bit, you know, aggressive about it like me, right? When I take a value play, I stand behind him in DFS, right? These value plays, core plays, like, I play much more than you probably should, right? I go out there, I take stands on them because, you know, they're guys that I'm telling other people to play, right? So I'm going to stand behind my analysis, right? So I go out there and I play them pretty aggressively. You know, in your player pool, if you're going to tail, you know, somebody like a Cameron Champ, right, you may be playing in like 7% of lineups, and that would still be leverage to the field. So, you know, I'm not saying go crazy on these guys. I might go a little crazy on them, right, out there in my exposure, but they have the kind of upside to crack a GPP kind of contest. So I like that there. I like the upside. And of course, right, all these plays, I would say, except for Tom Hoge, right, are getting after that driving distance. Now, Hoge, a little bit of a special case because of that iron play, but that's what I'm going after this week, right? It's my narrative, right, with the new course, with the new setup, with the lower rough. And, you know, it doesn't mean that that's going to be correct, but that's the shot that I'm taking, right? And if I end up being correct about course conditions, I'm going to have some correlation to take advantage of and hopefully find some of those ceiling performances for my lineup. So that's the idea. That's the game plan out there for the Houston Open, and hopefully it can be a favorable one for us. That is all I've got for my DFS and betting preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of the content to come. We'll have a little prop preview dropping tomorrow, going over some underdog and prize pick stuff out there for round 1. Also, our weekly live stream Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you don't want to miss any of that, make sure you are subscribed so you can get notifications for when all of that goes up. But until then, appreciate the support here. Again, smash that like button if you haven't already. And I want to know down in the comments, guys, who you've got as your winner. And there's not going to be any contest for it because everyone would just say Scotty Sheffer, right? If I was giving away a free month of the Patreon page. But if you want to get into a drawing for that, I am doing it for the winning score prediction this week. So hop on over to the course preview, go ahead and comment that. And I still want to know your thoughts down below about an outright because I need to add some more exposure, right? I said I was a little bit scared about it, but maybe I do add a Ryan Fox. Maybe I do add that Cameron Champ outright. Maybe even a Jake Knap, who knows, right? We'll have to see, but let me know your thoughts down there. And hey, if you can sell me on it, if there's somebody that you can find a good number on, maybe I'll tail you on that down there. But we'd love to hear your thoughts down there below. That's all I've got, guys. Again, appreciate the support on the channel, and let's have ourselves a week for the Houston Open.